that the book, The Metamorphosis of Memphis, is the byproduct of an effort to have Robert R. Church Sr. included in the Memphis Bicentennial. And so when I finally got before the committee persons who were celebrating the bicentennial or leading us in the celebration of the bicentennial, I asked them, did they plan to do anything with Robert R. Church Sr.? And they said, no, we don't know who Robert R. Church Sr. is. And so I sat there at the moment and shared with them, and they were just amazed that this man had done all this for the city of Memphis, but nobody had even brought to their attention that this man needed to be celebrated. What I need to also add, as it relates to the work of the LSP, the Lynching Site Project, is that we kept running into Ida B. Wells. Ida B. Wells was a contemporary of Robert Reed Church Sr., and she said this to him one time: what benefit is a leader if he does not devote his time, talent, and wealth to the alleviation of poverty and misery and the elevation of his people? That admonishment to Robert Reed Church Sr. led him to become one of the most philanthropic members of the Memphis society, in fact, in Memphis history. Robert Church then became a very benevolent individual who worked for the good of his people and for the good of this city. And so I explained to the young people why Robert R. Church should be a part of the celebration, and they soon understood why. Had it not been for Robert R. Church, we might not have a Memphis, Tennessee. We might still be a taxing district in the state of Tennessee. What happened was Memphis had some $5 million in debt. And because of the 1878 yellow fever epidemic, could not pay off her debt. And so the state stripped her of the charter and reduced her to a taxing.
Hello, you're fine.
Are we okay?
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
And so when they were trying to get out of that situation, many of the members said, well, let's don't pay it, forget it. We don't have to pay that. They were trying to find ways of not paying it. And Robert Reed Church stepped up and bought the first $1,000 bond. And upon purchasing that bond, he inspired other wealthy citizens to do the same thing. In a very short period of time, they purchased over 200,000 municipal bonds to pay off their debt. And then Memphis was restored as a city. So in the book, I talk about the founders, the organizers of Memphis, Andrew Jackson, John Overton, and James Winchester being the founders of Memphis, but you have to give Robert Reed Church Sr. credit for saving Memphis. And that was worthy of his being included in the bicentennial celebration. I was happy and delighted that Mayor Strickland allowed a committee to form, and we celebrated with a parade down Beale Street to Church Park. We had a large birthday cake. We had live blues music. The parade was led by the Memphis Vet Clubs, Vets Only Club, and it was a great, great time. Was to bring about a celebration in recognition of this man who had saved the city of Memphis. But also in that research, I ran across bits and pieces of history that I had lived through, not knowing that I had lived through it. And I invited my dear friend, the Reverend Dr. William Beale Atkins, to come on with me tonight because he and I grew up in that same era. We went to segregated movie theaters. We waited for the colored water fountain to be vacated so we could use it when other fountains were not being used. We lived by parks that we couldn't go in while other kids went in without reservation and hesitation. And we couldn't dare go across the street and go in that park. We happened in Memphis, Tennessee. But then I thought back that when I was a boy, 10 years of age, we used to work on Main Street for the Cotton Carnival. Keep in mind, Cotton Carnival was the white celebration of cotton being king. there was another celebration called the Cotton Makers Jubilee. And I had a chance to work on Main Street selling popcorn and candy and snowballs and things like that. And before we would start out, Mr. Buck, I never did know Mr. Buck's last name, but Mr. Buck would have us look at him, look me straight in the face and listen to every word I'm telling you. We said, yes, sir. And he said, don't you spend no time looking at white people. Don't even look them in the face. You look down when you're standing before them and you say, yes, sir, and no, sir. Do you hear me? Yes, sir, we hear you. Then don't forget Emmett Till. Wow, that was a powerful blow to say the 10-year-old boys, 10, 11-year-old boys, don't forget Emmett Till. Emmett Till had been lynched. And the fear was, many parents in the Black community was, don't look at a white woman. Don't say anything back to a white man because they didn't want us to be lynched. So I had that experience. What we would do, we would start at Poplar in Maine. We couldn't walk on the sidewalk. We had to walk on down the curb. And when we got to Beale Street, we turned east on Beale Street, and it was altogether a different atmosphere. I remember the rules were relaxed. We were able to pop our fingers and skip along with the beat of the music coming from the cafe juke joints. But also, as we walked down Beale Street, we saw shops and businesses that were owned by African-American people. On the lower end, you had the lawyer's offices and the dentist's offices. You had the printing shops. All that was on Beale Street. I saw that. We saw all of that. The nightclubs were owned by people on Beale Street. But what I did not know was, as much as segregation was in force, on Beale Street, there was an atmosphere seemingly somewhat relaxed. Italians and Jewish people, Irish, and on, coexisted in business. And in many instances, the proprietors of these businesses lived above their business. And so in the evening time, when the stores would close, they would find their way back on the streets, Beale Street, and what have you. But it was against the law for a white person to come on Beale Street at night. I didn't know that in research, but they put together one night that blacks couldn't go, and that was on a Thursday night. It was called the Midnight Ramble, and in that case, blacks couldn't go on Beale Street because the whites could come and enjoy the taste of Beale Street. I thought that was amazing. And then in that research, I read about a young man named Elvis Presley who was drawn to Beale Street because of the music. And Elvis Presley was given special privileges on Beale Street in the clubs. The bouncers got to know him, and they would let him in, and they would give him a seat close to the exit. So if there were a raid or if police came in, Elvis could ease out the side door, and not be arrested. So wow. And Elvis Presley stayed in the company of the Newman family, and that was one brother who played guitar, Calvin Newman brother. And Calvin had an act. He was more than just a player. He carried on. He would run, jump off the stage, and land in the audience and do a split on the floor. He'd stand up again, still playing his guitar. And so Elvis Presley was watching. And Rufus Thomas, that Elvis Presley did not come on Beale Street to promote Elvis Presley. He came to learn the artistic skills of the performance on Beale Street. And he made no bones about that. He and Calvin, he and B.B. King would appear whenever possible on charity shows and what have you. Another famous Memphian who hung out on Beale Street was named Sputnik Monroe. Sputnik was a professional wrestler who had been programmed as the bad guy. And so the contest was always between the bad guy and the good guy. Billy Wicks was the good guy, Sputnik Monroe was the bad guy. And so we'd go to the wrestle with my dad, and we'd be pulling for Billy Wicks. But we did not know that Sputnik Monroe was always pulling for us. When he was arrested on Beale Street for being in a nightclub, sitting with black customers and drinking, he hired Russell Sugarman, black attorney, to represent him in court. And as they were leaving, Russell asked him, said, "Now, are you going back?" He said, "Absolutely. If I don't go back, they win. I'll just take extra $25 to get out of jail." But Sputnik Monroe insisted that black fans would sit on the same floor with white fans. And that night, they broke down segregation in the first professional sport was wrestling. And he was really my hero, and I didn't know that he was my hero. And so then you go on to understand the culture of Beale Street. In the book, I talk about how the migration from the cotton field, Arkansas, North Mississippi, Southeast Missouri, West Tennessee, and southern portion of Kentucky, all of it ended up in Memphis. And people were coming to play their music. They came to get work, but in their leisure time, they would play their music. And when the professional recording companies and record companies discovered this was a unique music that needed to be recorded and sold, they came to Memphis to record these artists. Ike Turner, who's infamously known as the husband of Tina Turner, was the talent scout for Sam Phillips. And Ike Turner knew all the artists in the Mississippi Delta, and so it was nothing for Ike to go down and bring 4 or 5 guys back and come back to Sun Studios and begin to play that music and be recorded. Also, at the same time, Sam Phillips had come to Memphis to organize and record country music. So you had your country artists coming and the blues artists coming. And someone said that the blues and country got together and rockabilly was born, rock and roll was born. But all of that happened with great influence from Beale Street. Now we give W.C. Handy credit for being the father of the blues, but we have to keep in mind that he was not the first blues player. W.C. Handy was the first man to put the blues onto sheet music and then to sell sheet music, highlighting the blues, Memphis blues and St. Louis blues and that kind of thing. And he became known as the father of the blues. But he had a lot of raw material to work with. And this is the aspect of Beale Street. He had all this raw material to work with, but he had a host of women on Beale Street who would train these musicians, who mostly came playing by ear. They didn't read music, they played by ear. And Leal Harding, who later on married Louis Armstrong, was one of those teachers on Beale Street. Mrs. Lucy Campbell, Ben Hooks' grandmother, Julia Hooks, was one of those teachers. And they would take these men and teach them how to read music, how to arrange music, and on and on and on, which gave the Memphis musicians a special edge when it came to recording. And I discovered that when a musician left Memphis and went to New York, that person was highly sought after because they could read music. And most African-American musicians could not read. In fact, many of the stars that we celebrate could not read, they were illiterate, couldn't read their name if you wrote it and put it in front of them. But the Memphis musicians who came through this academy of women teachers could read music, arrange music, and on and on and on. And some of the greats that came out of Memphis, you'd have to give Hank Crawford a big round of applause for being a legendary saxophone player that he was. But he came through direct influence of Manassas High School, but indirectly through the influence of Beale Street. So all of that was real interesting to me to see that. But my mind keeps going back now to Ida B. Wells, because Ida B. Wells probably was the first anti-lynching crusader in Memphis. But she was run out of town because she wrote about the lynching and she called it out. And she named it for what it was and said the only way to respond to it was put the light of truth on it. And that's what she did. When she was run out of town, she moved to Chicago and later on ended up in New York City as one of the co-founders of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Now, on Thursday, had she lived, she would have been 158 years young. Her birthday is July 16th. And I'm asking a committee of people of goodwill and people who see the merits of this. We have an unpaid debt to Ida B. Wells that of all the cities that have honored her, I don't know of any place in Memphis that we have honored her. And I have made a proposal to several people who thought it was a good idea that we would build a statue of Ida B. Wells and dedicate it to her memory and the great work that she has done in the city and put it on Beale Street. So that meeting, I'll have that meeting with some dear friends on her birthday to see if that can catch fire and we can make it happen. Mm-hmm. The other part of Beale Street was that it was the center of educational development. The Beale Street School, the Howe Institute, the Lamorne Owen College, all of that started on Beale Street. And when you look at Howe Institute, look at some of the people who came. You had Richard Wright, you had Mordecai Johnson, who became the first Black president of Howard University. You had J.O. Patterson Sr., C.L. Franklin of Detroit, all went to Howe Institute here in Memphis that was started on Beale Street. Now, the Beale Street Baptist Church is said by many to be the mother of all churches, all Black churches in Memphis, because many of them came out of that church. And Beale Street Baptist Church was built by slaves and ex-slaves. There were some free people involved, but mostly by ex-slaves who had pooling their resources together and building this historical institution we now know as First Baptist Beale. And you go on down and you think about Danny Thomas in Beale Street. There was a city ordinance passed that said a street running east and west would be called an avenue. Streets running north and south would be called streets. And so when they recognized that they'd been calling Beale Street, they changed the name to Beale. People put up with that, but they didn't like it. But when Danny Thomas saw it, wrote a song and Give Me Back My Beale Street. He wrote that song, Praiser for St. Jude, and Mayor Toby was in the audience and told him that night, you can have your Beale Street back. And so Beale Street is the only street that one of the few, if there's another, I don't know about it, that runs east and west, and it's called a street. That was because Danny Thomas said we couldn't have that. Now, a thought comes that if you can't tolerate anything, you will never change it. Danny Thomas could not tolerate having Beale Street called Beale Avenue, and so he sought to change. And so it is with our work in LSP. We can change whatever we need to change if we have the resolve to do that. We are committed to pooling our talent and our resources to make it happen. So I commend the work of LSP, and we're happy about it. Now, I close with this book by planning for the next 200 years. And I challenge the city of Memphis that we cannot accept 26% of the population living in poverty. We cannot accept that dubious distinction of having that placed on us in the middle of this growth and development of our city. Now, keep in mind, Memphis economy has always been based on low wages, finding enough people to work at low wages. So that's why the fight for slavery, the slight fight to preserve slavery, was such a fight in Memphis, Tennessee, and for a long, long time we finally found the last images of the Confederacy removed from public display in 2018. That's how long it lasted. And now across the country, after the death of George, you find people taking down these monuments and reminders of what the power structure was to be. And so I end by saying that we cannot accept poverty. And the founder of South Memphis, that's where Beale Street was organized, in South Memphis. I didn't know who the founder of South Memphis was, and I did not know who Beale Street was named after until I completed my research. And Robertson Top organized South Memphis in 1846, and the main thoroughfare was, and he wanted to name, wanted him to name it Top Avenue, Top Street, or whatever it was, and he refused the honor and said, "No, there's a war hero that I would like to have it named after," and that's what he did. He named it after this war hero that he was real fond of, and that was Mr. Beale. He was a celebrated hero, and so that's what the Beale Street name comes from. And so that's why I think the unpaid debts, as I see it in the book, Ida B. Wells, certainly Robert R. Reed Church, who gave an auditorium and park because the city of Memphis would not build one. The city tore it down, and that's an unpaid debt we need to pay. And then certainly to name a street in honor of Robertson Top. And then I spoke that the men and women who saved this city during the yellow fever epidemic of 1878, no monument has been erected for them. And the best place I can think of right now would be the former site of the Bedford Forest Park on Union Avenue. That would be a good site for that monument. It would be a good site for our duplicate monument. But poetic justice would be that the men and women who saved Memphis, when white citizens fled Memphis, they stayed and buried the dead, took care of the sick. They cleaned the streets, and they took care of property. They guarded the streets, patrolled the streets to make sure that peace and order were in place. Even against, sometimes they had to arrest their own people because they thought because they were black they could get away with certain things. But these men patrolled, and they maintained law and order in a time when the city was in disarray. Now, I think, John, I can stop at that and entertain any question. The book is 116 pages long. I have several pictures in the book. If you look at the cover, you will see some of the main characters of the development of Memphis and the blues in Beale Street. And it is a work in progress. And I would hope that input from you listening tonight and those who read it will lead to a second and maybe a third edition of us looking back and being honest as we look back at our history. Now, one last thing I mentioned that Memphis is always dependent upon low wages, cheap labor, if I could say it that way. In 1869, there was a conference held by the Chamber of Commerce. And that conference was to see if we could get some Asian people to come to Memphis now to work. And the thought was they have lost the slaves, the African slaves. We need to find workforce. And maybe we can go to Asia and recruit people and bring them to Memphis to carry on the work. It was estimated that 500 people showed up for that meeting. That's how strong the interest was in finding cheap labor. I'll stop at that, John.
Yeah, that's the question. Bill Atkins has a question. I have the same question. If I heard you correctly, Beale Street was named Beale Street around 1848. Is that correct?
Yeah, right.
And it was named Beale Street after a war man. And the question that Bill Atkins asked, and I thought the same thing. Bill's question reads: so is Beale Street named after a Confederate soldier?
No. He was He's an American-Mexican war hero.
Okay.
Now,
That's an
on
interesting- Yeah, go ahead.
that, I need to say this, that Robert Reed Church was fighting on the side of the when his boat was overtaken. And Robert had walked to the banks, and that's how he escaped being made a prisoner or being killed or being taken as a prisoner of war. But Robert Reed Church was fighting on the side of the Confederacy with his father, Charles Church, who was the owner of many steamboats at that time. So very few people talk about that Robert Reed Church Sr. was on the side of the Confederacy, but he knew where his interest was. And from that day forward, he fought for the liberation and the edification of African American people.
Dr. Gray, your last statements that you made about Robert Reed Church, your voice was very garbled and it broke up. I wondered if you could repeat it.
The last statement I made?
Yes, the last few sentences, the last, like 1 minute or so.
Yeah, when the Union won Memphis, in the Battle of Memphis, when they won, Robert Church, rather than go and be a captive to the Union Army, he jumped into the river and swam to the banks and made his way up the banks and on down to Beale Street, where he began to establish himself as a businessman, trained by his daddy. Now keep in mind, Robert Reed Church was born of a slave girl in Holly Springs, Mississippi, by Charles Church, who was the owner of a fleet of steamboats in Memphis. When Robert Reed Church's mother died, they sent Robert Reed Church Sr. to Charles Church. Charles Church was supposed to prepare Robert Reed Church to go to the North and to receive the best education possible. But instead of sending him to the North, Charles Church kept Robert Church and trained him in the steamboat industry. The other interesting thing was he taught Robert Reed Church to read receipts in French.
Oh my goodness.
Well, most of his business came out of New Orleans.
This is wonderful information.
So Robert Reed was a shrewd businessman from the time he joined his father in the steamboat industry as a boy who had just lost his mother. And they promised him, the owners of his mother promised him that he would never be sold again into slavery. So they sent him to his dad. His dad was going to take him to North and the best schools possible for him to get an education, but he decided to keep his boy, and he raised his boy in the steamboat industry and taught him business principles and on and on and on. And he was a shrewd businessman.
Wow. That's fascinating. How did his father get freed?
Pardon me?
How was his father freed?
His father was a white man.
Ah, I didn't know that. Wow.
His father was a white man.
Ah.
I failed to say that, and I apologize. Charles Church was a white man, a big, successful businessman in Memphis, Tennessee, operating a fleet of steamboats when the steamboat industry just kicked off. Now, keep in mind, the steamboat industry played a big part in Memphis becoming, I think, the third largest port on the Mississippi River. The steamboat industry was a driving force in that until the railroad came through. And when the railroad was finally completed from the Atlantic coast to the Memphis, up until that point, the steamboat was the major form of transporting the cotton.
Gotcha.
And now that brings up another interesting point. Ed Crump was born in Holly Springs, Mississippi. Robert Reed Church was born in Holly Springs, Mississippi. So was Ed Crump. Now, these two never sent horses together. Because keep in mind, Robert Reed Church Sr. became a staunch Republican. Crump was a Democrat. And the church machine ran politics in Memphis until he died and his son took over, and his son took it to a whole new level. But the straw that broke the camel's back with the locked African-American vote in Memphis was the mistreatment of Lieutenant Lee when they would not seat him as a delegate to one of their conventions. And when that happened, the blacks broke from the Republican Party, and then you come along with the advent of John F. Kennedy and Truman desegregating the military, and on and on and on. It was just an unraveling of that tight bond between blacks and the Republican Party. But it started with the mistreatment of Lieutenant Lee, who was a Republican, and when they tried to recruit him to be a Democrat, he said, "I was born a Republican, and I will die as a Republican." And he embraced the Republican Party because it was the party of Lincoln. That in mind. Why black folk were in the Republican Party, but the Lincoln Party and the Republican Party of the day are as different as night and day. Nowhere coming close to being the same. And so that's an interesting development. But in those days, no one would challenge Bob Church. Now, Bob Church is Robert Church Jr. And you hear people talk Bob Church, Bob Church, Bob Church. But no one would challenge Robert Sr. nor Robert Jr. In those days. And finally, people came around to challenge them, men like Universal Life founder
J.E. Walker.
J.E. Walker. Dr. J.E. Walker was one of the first to challenge the church machine, and just gave a different opinion about the politics going on. But up until that point, nobody even counted. Now, J.E. Walker came to Memphis and organized the Universal Life Insurance Company, became one of the largest black-owned businesses in the country. But he also had a vision for his people and how to get things done, and on and on and on. And while many folk were trying to court the Crump machine to get things done, there were some people who said, "We're not going to do that. We're going to stand in defiance of that. We're not going to be mistreated like that." And so you had that group that came back, Brother Beale, after the Second World War. And that was the group that said, "No, we're not going to bow and scrape." And that's when the civil rights movement in Memphis started anew. And it was no accommodating the wishes of powers to be. They just stood firmly that they would not take anything less than. And then they organized. That's the other thing. Bob Church Jr. organized the NAACP in Memphis. It was dangerous to organize it was dangerous to be a member of the NAACP, but he organized the first chapter in Tennessee.
Dr. Elmella Starks writes, says, "Hello, Dr. Gray. This is Elmella Starks, Joy. Alma Stark's daughter. I grew up on Stevens Place across the street from Lieutenant George F. Lee. After closing of the post office on Mississippi Street, are there any plans for memorializing him?"
They still have the street named after him in the downtown area. But I would say to my dear sister Starks that that's not nearly enough to honor this man. We need to name another post office in honor of him for all that Lieutenant Lee did for us as a people.
Dr. Gray, may I interrupt here and share that Lieutenant George Lee's daughter, Gilda Lee, and I went to school together. We were actually classmates.
Oh, yeah. I know Gil. Wonderful lady.
Yeah,
she's in England, isn't she?
She lives in London, outside of London, England. And she's come back to Memphis on several occasions and trying to do just that, trying to reorganize some kind of naming for her father and to honor him. But you know, one of the things you brought up that is so remarkable is that not only was Lieutenant George Lee a Republican, but Dr. Martin Luther King Sr. was a Republican. So many others were Republicans in the Black community, because that was of the party of Lincoln. My father was a Republican back in the 40s and all, and of course it started shifting and changing. But George Lee was one of the most influential African Americans Memphis ever had. I mean, this man was able to get so much done, and he's gotten so much little credit. Just like Robert Church, it's almost as if Robert Church and George Lee has almost been forgotten in history.
Yeah, and I think it's up to us to make sure they're not forgotten, and working on that. Tell my sister Starks that we need to get together and make sure that Lieutenant Lee is memorialized in a real meaningful way, and it may be on Beale Street where we can get the park reestablished and have a statue of the likes placed on that park ground. And but now let me say about Sister Starks. Her mother taught me in the 4th grade at Old Grant School.
Oh Lord!
At the Memphis Theological Seminary as an advisor. And I don't know if I would have gotten out had it not been for him. So I'm doubly blessed to be acquainted with her mother and father.
Another question, and Dr. Gray, you'll like this question. Where can we get Dr. Gray's Metamorphosis of Memphis book?
If you contact me, I'll make sure you get a copy. You can reach me at 901-832-1629. We had started to launch the book, and then the pandemic hit, and we had to draw back. And I had done several book signings, and Pastor Atkins' church was to be scheduled shortly thereafter. But I went up in Fayette County and had a book signing one Sunday afternoon. And this is how knuckleheaded I was. I took a few books. I'm saying, well, these folks not going to buy this book up here. So I gave my little speech, and they had people lined up all the way to the back of the church wanting a copy of the book. And so I ended up taking names and sending copies to them. But anybody who wants a copy, I will make sure you get a copy. Now, I'm going to place in the Memphis, the Ben Hooks Library, several copies because Mr. Dowdy, who is the librarian head of the Memphis room, was very helpful in getting me to the right places to research certain items that I was interested in. And then he and I are going to collaborate on another item that came out in the book during the racial tension and when Hurt Village was built in the Black community. The Hurt Village had a group, we just called them the gang. And if they caught one of us coming through or walking near the village, they would chase us. With bicycle chains and sticks and Coke bottles and that kind of thing. But David Norris saved a little white boy named David Denton in the bayou between Mill and 2nd Street. And once he saved that little white boy's life, the racial tensions eased, and David was a citywide hero. And that's in the early 50s, I think 52, 53, in the early 50s. And the school was overrun with people coming from all over the city to bring David gifts. And these were white men and women bringing him new clothing, a new bicycle, new shoes, no. But David saving that little boy's life eased the racial tensions right there at Hurt Village and Grant School. Grant was at Auction and 7th, and right behind our softball field was where they started building Hurt Village. And so they built a 7-foot wall between the playground and housing development. And later on, they even switched the school up on Chelsea Avenue, which was Pope School. And then they made Grant School Pope, and then Pope became Grant School. And so they put the schools in the communities that they thought was most populated by whatever ethnic group. And that solved the problem for a while, but eventually both schools became all Black schools because of the migration and of whites to the outer areas of our city. So it's a lot been happening in Memphis that people are not memorialized. Mr. Dowdy and I are going to work on getting something done for David Norris, because that was an epic moment in the transition of Memphis, Tennessee, because you could have had another race ride just between the kids at Grant School and the kids who lived in Hurt Village.
Somebody asked, Sarah Lynn Archibald asked, Dr. Gray, how could people rally with you to help make those statues happen? Meeting on the 16th, I think you said. So, and they're asking how can we? Yes, go ahead.
I have a Zoom meeting my daughter is organizing on the 16th, which is Ida B. Wells' birthday. And what I want to do again, let me ask you to call me, and I'll give you the link that you can be on that call. And what I'm asking, I have several good men involved, but I'm of the opinion that the women of this community ought to lead this project of building a statue for Ida B. Wells. I already have the artists who will do it. They're sitting on ready to go. And I've already talked with the management of Beale Street, and they said they have no problem with placing a statue of Ida B. Wells on Beale Street. So we got a lot of green lights. We just got to raise some green to make it happen.
Anybody else got any questions?
My name is Henry Snowden. I grew up in South Memphis, Dr. Gray. Love your book. I can't wait to read it. Can you tell me more about South Memphis? And that kind of piqued my interest when you talked about South Memphis and Beale Street. Could you elaborate just a little bit more, some more of that detail that you provide? Thank you.
Thank you for that question. I grew up thinking when they talked about South Memphis, they were talking about the Black community. And you discover that in 1846, South Memphis was another city by Mr. Robertson Top. And Robertson Top came to this area with a lot of money, and he decided to make it the crown jewel of development in going in this country. He built the first major hotel, the Gay Oso Hotel downtown. Didn't spare any money in making it the most elaborate hotel he could make. Then he comes to Beale Street, and along Beale Street, they built Palace Mansion. He built his home on Lauderdale in Beale, and it was the talk of the town. We had houses similar to his. He didn't have any tolerance for racism, and while he was a powerful man, Robert was a very powerful man. He didn't kowtow to the racial slurs, and he would take them on publicly, using his eloquence as a lawyer and his logic as a trained man. I mean, and he would publish his statement. That was low down, that was disrespectful, that was unrepresentative of, and he said that racial bigotry and racism, brother, were deterrents to progress in a community that he wanted to see become the very best it could become. And that may well be one of the reasons why no one has come forward to give Robertson Top a street or any kind of memorial in South Memphis. So it was an incorporated area south of Union Avenue, organized and incorporated, brother, in 1840, and began to grow and grow and grow.
Thank you.
Other questions? One of the interesting commentaries, as I listen to you talk about the influence of music, and I know Tom is very much a music person, the blues, and the fact that a lot of the people who played the blues couldn't read the music. As you said, they were illiterate. But I think that goes back to that thing about people having native intelligence and the ability to express their pain in ways that maybe everybody else doesn't understand. But I think the story of the blues and where it has gone to it tells a great story about the struggle of African Americans all across the Delta.
Yeah, one artist comes to mind that I admired. I loved his music, and I would buy, and I wear a cap in honor of him now. It's Bobby Blue Bland. Bobby Blue Bland couldn't read or write, and for many years he was exploited by promoters and producers and the whole works, until he married his wife, who could read and write, and she took over the management of his business, and then he began to realize and benefit from his talent. But a tremendous brother. Now here's a brother you can't read. You got to have a tremendous memory. If you can't read, you got to know when to come in on a song. You got to know when to end a song. To have that kind of memory, Bobby Blue Bland could have been anything he wanted to be if he had been trained. Now, he was kept out of education because he was a big guy, and the farm plantation owners, they utilized that physical physique. They wanted him to work. So he didn't get a chance to go to school and learn how to read it. And there were Beale who would teach guys how money, how not to be taken advantage of. And so Beale Street was more than just entertainment. Beale Street was also an informal yet very practical kind of education, because those who couldn't play and who couldn't read music, they were taught how to read music. Those who couldn't play certain chords, they were taught how to play certain chords. That's why the late night sessions on Beale Street, if you ever went to one of those, that's where the real music was. They weren't playing for compensation. They were playing for edification, for their own self-edification. They were playing to learn, well, how did you do that? And got to go back and show them. Evelyn Young, who was a female saxophone player, started playing on Beale Street at age 14. Evelyn Young would go to these sessions. She would say, there's going to be some head cutting up in here tonight. And she was going there to show the youngsters who were coming, or the men, that they couldn't beat her playing a saxophone, and she would put many of them to shame. But they learned by coming on Beale Street. There was a personhood given on Beale Street. You know, when you walk down Beale Street, as I mentioned earlier, the rules were relaxed. I didn't have to step off the sidewalk onto the curb. If I saw somebody come by, I walked right on by looking for, hey, what's going on? How you doing? It was people of our culture that we affirmed each other, and many with the sense of personhood because they had a chance to go by Beale Street.
Okay, other questions or comments? I thought something that I think Lucy Yates Henderson wrote that said about Beale Street, it was our place, our pain, and our pleasure all wrapped up in our food, drink, entertainment, courting respite and hopeless, and a prevailing pride of personage. And I think that's an extraordinarily powerful statement. A place where we could be our own. Other questions?
John, the oldest teenager in the world, Rufus Thomas, used to say, don't you die before you go to Beale Street.
Yeah.
If you spend one night on Beale Street, he would tell white folk, you'll never want to be white again. Now, what he was saying was that even if you are Italian, or you're Jewish, you're Irish, or you're Chinese, when you come on Beale Street, the melting pot, in the book I talk about the gumbo of Beale Street, how all of these ingredients came together and made up Beale Street. You couldn't take one out and it would be the same. You couldn't leave this out and it'd be the same. The gumbo of Beale Street was a microcosm of the world.
Yes.
When the Italians came to Memphis, they ended up on Beale Street. The Jewish merchants who got to Memphis, they ended up on Beale Street because there everybody was mixing and sharing. Everybody was a part of it. It's an amazing story of how people survived. Bill, what was the man name who ran Club Paradise? Sunbeam Mitchell. Sunbeam Mitchell got his financing from a Jewish man to go into the hotel business, the nightclub business. He got that from a Jewish man. We know him as Abe Plow. You take W.C. Handy. W.C. Handy got a chance to go into business because of an Italian who gave him listen, this is your headquarters, and here's the number. If you need to make anybody a contact or to contract for engagement, give them this number, and I'll write it down when you get here, and you'll have like an office here. Not only that, but people were allowed to stay at Pee Wee's. We're talking about Pee Wee's Bar and Grill. They could spend the night at Pee Wee's. And when it got cold at night, he didn't close the restaurant. He let them hang around the warm heater because he knew they'd have cold with nowhere to stay. But that kind of coming together, being human, responding to human needs, to see people move forward and to go on, is an amazing story that only happened on Beale Street.
Dr. Gray, let me ask a question here. As I sit here and listen to this history, this is such rich, important history. And my question is, and I'm thinking about facing history and ourselves. Have you had any conversation with them about somehow making a module of this presentation available to the youth of Memphis? Now, whether that's done through churches, community groups, or schools, but I think it's a very, very important piece of history that young people in Memphis, especially African American youth and white youth too, for that part, need to know about this, because there's a very deep richness in all of this.
Exactly. My whole thing about writing this book is that someone has to know this. Now, here I am. I'm a lifelong Memphian, all but 6 months, and many of the things I discovered I didn't know. I didn't know about the midnight ramble. I knew on Thursdays I couldn't go to the zoo. I mean, that was the only day I could go to the zoo, rather. But I didn't know that I couldn't go on Beale Street on Thursday night. I didn't know that. And I say how interesting this is. And you take a disc jockey like Dewey Phillips, who was the first disc jockey to play Elvis Presley's music on radio, but he was also the first disc jockey to play black musicians on his television, his radio show. So you look at guys like Sam Phillips. When Sam Phillips started recording artists, he recorded all who came, black and white, hillbilly and blues. He just thought, because he wanted to record this unique music that he had heard. And so the Superintendent Dr. Ray of the Shelby County School System and I were talking about this book. In fact, he writes one of the forewords in the book because he was intrigued by the gumbo concept, how it all comes together. Right. And neither loses its identity. Neither ingredient loses its identity. And that's how success is made. And one of the great strengths of America is that we've all come together. We brought our talents, and now we got to, don't let anybody divide us, but have more and more ways of bonding and sharing the talents and the uniqueness that we bring. And that's what makes America great. So I'm hoping that once the pandemic lifts, that we can get back on track with the launching of the book and get into the schools. And I have a young lady working on a reader from the book where children can start to read. And the book is written, there's a timeline, there's a 200-year timeline in the book. Yes. That facts in the book that you will not read anywhere else. A lot of folk don't know the role that sports played in the integration of Memphis. Mm-hmm. When I was in high school, Bill, when you were in high school, blacks and white didn't go to sporting events together. The black schools had our games and the white schools had their games. But there's a kid at Melrose named Bobby Smith. Bobby Smith was so awesome that groups of whites would come to see him. They'd put him in a corner close to the exit, so if the police came or trouble started, they could get out of there. But they came to see Bobby Smith. So when Bobby Smith graduated, they wanted Bobby Smith to go to Memphis State. Memphis State didn't want Bobby Smith. 126 schools in the country wanted Bobby Smith, but Memphis did not want him. So Tulsa takes Bobby Smith, and then Tulsa comes back here to play Memphis State, and Bobby Smith puts on a shooting exhibition. Those same folk who had come to see Bobby Smith as a player in high school went to the University of Memphis and said, we're not going to let another Bobby Smith leave Memphis and come back here and beat us. So the next couple of years, Larry Finch came on the scene. And they said, oh, we can't let Larry Finch get away. Now, the black community is upset because the way they had treated Bobby Smith. So the black community tells Larry Finch, don't go over there. They're going to do you the same way they did Bobby Smith. It was a mean, cruel way that Bobby Smith was treated. Bobby Smith goes on to make the NBA All-Star team, and he may be now in the NBA Hall of Fame. But Bobby Smith brought about that kind of blending And so Larry Finch decided, against the advice of his own high school coach, William Collins didn't even attend the signing. It was that kind of posture. Don't go over there. But Larry Finch goes over and signs, and the rest of it is history. When you got a ticket to a Memphis State game during the Larry Finch area, you set black and white together, rich and poor together. We were all there to see Larry Finch lead the Tigers to victory. Well, that same kind of avidity led to the sports fans and the power brokers of University of Memphis demanding that you have black players in football. Well, they were reluctant to do that. That was a guy named Billy Spook Murphy who was hell-bent on not having black players at the University of Memphis. And that went on for years. And then leaving Memphis, going off to other schools, coming back, beating the socks off of Memphis. And so finally they got to the athletic department and they started to recruit black players. And they hired a guy named Pete. That's in the book too. Pete Mitchell goes over as the first black coach in football. And Pete Mitchell was a recruiter. Went all over the Mid-South recruiting black players to go to the University of Memphis. And also he was a player developer. And unprecedented success under Pete Mitchell. And then you come back in 2019 with the University of Memphis going to the Cotton Bowl. A dynasty is built when you relax racial discrimination, racial denial, and marginalization. When you put that aside, Memphis State is a athletic dynasty. And so we can't give Memphis State a pass yet because Memphis State has 13 head coaches of major sports and only one African American. 65% of your athletes are African Americans. You only have one coach. You can't give Memphis State, University of Memphis, a pass yet. And I'm an alumnus of the University of Memphis, but we can't give her a pass yet. But the dynasty was built by the avidity of fans who said we can't let a player get away because they're black.
Okay, we've got a comment that says, someone asked Dr. Gray to comment on the film, If Beale Street Could Talk. It doesn't seem fair to our city's heritage. Any comment on that?
I think you're exactly right. It was an exploitation because when I read about If Beale Street Could Talk, it was nothing about the Beale Street that we know. Nothing about Handy Theater, the new days and the old days of theater. Nothing about the characters of Beale Street, Lieutenant Lee, Robert Reed Church, and on, Sunbeam Mitchell and B.B. King. It had nothing to do with any of that. And so I wrote a letter and said to the powers that be in Memphis that we need to, as soon as we can, incorporate and have this name, a brand that people can't go around and trivializing to sell a book or to sell a movie. And I think that's what we were taking advantage of. They played with that name because they knew it would bring attention. And I think it was a miscarriage and a misuse of the great legacy of Memphis, Tennessee, and Beale Street.
Okay, we've got a few more minutes left. Any other questions or comments? This has been extraordinary.
Yes, I have another question, Dr. Gray. You talked about 26% of poverty in Memphis, and we need to remedy that or change that or improve that or get rid of that. What's the plan to be able to do that?
I challenge the Chamber of Commerce, tremendous leadership. You have to admit that Memphis is now in an economic boom. You're not going to change the poverty rate in Memphis, Tennessee with a minimum wage. You're not going to do that. It's going to be very difficult to give even a living wage. But I'm proposing that in these pockets of our community that we go in and partnership with individuals in those communities to start businesses. As an entrepreneur, you can rise above whatever your circumstances are. If you can control your purse understand how to control how to create capital and how to handle it, how to invest capital. But you got to take the barriers out of the way of these people living in these communities. We can't marginalize a community because it's in a poor zip code. I think 38106 at one time was one of the poorest zip codes in the city. You can't marginalize people because of where they were born. We got to look at the potential and move in with programs so people can come out. So I said, rather than just give jobs, absolutely we need jobs, but rather than just give jobs, go in and show them how to set up businesses. Go in and show them how, instead of cutting grass for somebody else, how to get your own lawnmower, your own trailer, your own truck, and how you can go in business for yourself, how you can pay your taxes, how you can pay your employees, how you can hire other folk to work, and then you start something when you do that. And so I propose that idea, that partnership, and it won't hurt FedEx to bring on 9 or 10 guys in some of these poverty pockets and say, I'm going to put you in business and I'm going to let you clean up all of the hub when the hub is over. I'm not going to hire you as an employee, I'm going to let you clean the hub up. I'm going to pay you, and then you can hire 4 or 5 more people, or the same thing out in other businesses. And rather than you got a dollar store in town that desperately needs cleaning up, and rather than pay somebody $5 or $8 an hour or $9 an hour to do it, no, give them a contract. Let them do it. Let them hire people. Show them how to keep books and on and on. And so I think there's a lot of potential. If we can get our minds set in that direction, then we can change poverty in this community.
Excellent.
Thank you,
Other
Doctor.
comments, please.
John, before I leave that, the
Yes.
other area that we got to visit is this cash bail bonding business. It is the greatest exploitation of poor people in the world. You go down to 201 go down to the Walter Lee Bailey Criminal Justice Complex on a Monday morning, and you see people are lined up to put their homes on the line to get Junebug out of jail. This cash bond bail business is one of the biggest drains, and most times it's for nonviolent offenses. If you could release the nonviolent people in our jails and prisons now, you could save a whole lot of money for the taxpayer, but also you could decriminalize and labeling those individuals for the rest of their lives. Nonviolent crime, you make them pay the cost for that, yeah, but you don't have to put it on there perpetually, or the box, the felony box. And then every time you read it, you can't give them a job because pay the dues, but you're a felon. Why pay my dues? And you tell them no, you can't. Then you end up with a person becoming frustrated, and they go back to what they know. Mayor Strickland has a program now, Young Man University, that's designed to break that, train them. We had a group at New Sardis before I retired, and I was so glad that morning to see that group was Black and white, Hispanics, and the whole rainbow of life. And one young white fellow that Saturday mornings we were preparing for his graduation, he said, I've never owned a suit in my life. He said, I got a suit now. I know how to wear this suit. I know how to act in this suit. I never owned a suit in my life. Well, you change the mindset, you change the behavior, you change the attitude, and you change their pursuit of life. And I'm so optimistic about that program, because if you keep this recidivism going, you're out 6 months, you're back in jail for 12 months, out in 6 months, back in jail 12 months. See, that you're not doing but recycling humanity. And I hope that programs like that, and others may have ideas how they can be done, but I have the ear of Ken Moody, and I have the ear of our mayor, and I will gladly say to him, if I have an idea that can break this cycle of poverty, I'll be glad to share it with him.
I'd like to say something about that. Today, the City Council was considering a vote on the ban the box movement. In other words, don't put that box next to
Wonderful.
Ellen's name. And
Wonderful.
Micah was very much behind that. And I know about 200 people who wrote letters to all the council people urging the city council to change that. So that's a good thing. And we do need to address this box that's put on someone that stays with them as they try to find employment. And take it off. Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Other questions or comments? We have a few minutes left. Tom, you got anything you want to say? I see you reaching over there.
Dr. Gray.
Yes, sir.
Hello. This is Randy. Hey, there's several things that come to my mind. One is, can you talk a little bit about Church Park? And the reason why I say that, because Church Park used to have an auditorium. That's where they actually had the meeting, the Lincoln League, and the things that actually happened. And the second thing is, you talked about, the IDB World statue. I know every July, from the last 3 years, I think LSP had gone down to Holly Springs. Because they have a social justice weekend and stuff like that, right? And I know, several of us have met, the great granddaughter, Michelle Duster of IDB Wells. But can you just elaborate a little bit about the importance of Church Park when it was developed? Its importance, meetings that were actually held there and stuff like that.
Randy, that's an excellent question. In 1899, after the city promised and failed repeatedly to build a park for Negroes in Memphis, quote, Negroes, Robert Church decided to build one himself without a dime of taxpayers' money. He built an auditorium that seated 2,000 people. All of the amenities of a theater where they could put on shows and concerts and have meetings, and they hosted some of the most important meetings that ever went to Memphis at the church auditorium. When the President of the United States, Teddy Roosevelt, came to Memphis, he spoke at the Church Park Auditorium. And Robert R. Church Jr. made it clear everybody was welcome, and people of all ethnic groups came to hear our president speak. But the playground was like, as G.P. Hamilton says in his book, it was like an oasis in a desert. There was no park in Memphis decorated the way Church Park was. They had peacocks strolling around the campus at night. It lighted up, beautiful light. It was a sight to see. But Church Park did that. Church did that with his own money because the city of Memphis would not build Negroes a park. In their effort to destroy Church, all kinds of evil things were done to his family. Accused of paying taxes, taking back property, watching the home house burn down and not lifting a hand to put the fire out, things like that, threatening the life of Bob Church and the lives of his family that they left here. And so when the city got ownership of the park, they allowed it to fall in disrepair. They promised in 1987, when Dick Hackett was mayor, they promised to rebuild that park and auditorium. And now you're under the cloud of the agreement that the city has with the FedEx Forum that you can't build an auditorium with X number of seats without their approval. But I think in restoring the Church Park, it could be a gathering place for all ethnic groups, for all occasions, for all civically involved in civic advancements for this community without reservation. It would be one of the best investments Memphis has made on that eastern end of Beale Street. That's where the big bands came and played. That's where W.C. Handy's band played, was at the auditorium. W.C. Handy also had his office in the Solvent Bank, which was right next to First Baptist Beale Church. And that's where the publishing company was started with Harry Pace. And all of that is a part of that history that unless we do something to preserve it, we're going to lose it. So I want people are interested, I gave a talk at Russ College back in, I think it was February, and I challenged the audience that I would pay the first $1,000 toward a statue. Then the president, Dr. David Beckley, signed on. He approved of the concept, and we started talking about the plan and the cost of what the statue would run. The statue would run between $75,000 and $100,000. That's from concept to completion and installation. And so, anyway, in the interim, he ended up retiring earlier than he had planned to. And so, what I'm trying to find out, I'm giving the new president time to get on board and get adjusted to her new job. Dr. Taylor, young female from San Antonio, Texas, and now the new president of Russ College. So I'm waiting to have a chance to meet with her. But I'm not going to wait. I'm not going to wait to meet with them at this point. I'm moving forward and getting it off the ground. We can raise $100,000 in Memphis overnight if the right people resolve to do it. That's all it takes. So my $1,000 will go in the bank after the meeting on Thursday night, and then we'll start raising monies from there to have this in the auditorium, on that ground, or on Beale, wherever on Beale Street, in some prominent place. We ought to have that done.
Okay, very good. Kelsey Lampkin writes, to go back to the issue of poverty, why isn't raising the minimum wage to a living wage part of eliminating poverty? If a person hypothetically created their own business, would their employees not deserve a living wage? Perhaps I misunderstood. Go ahead.
No, I think they go together. It's not an either or. They must go together. You got to get out of this minimum wage. It's almost criminal to ask a person to provide for family and food, clothing, and shelter on minimum wage. But a living wage is a step in the right direction. But in a living wage, work on entrepreneurship. Now, African Americans, we are the only group that came to America to work for somebody else. Involuntarily it was, but no other ethnic group has come here waiting and wanting to work for somebody else. They all came with ideas of going into business and working for themselves. We're the only ethnic group in this country that came with our culture completely destroyed, they thought. Every other ethnic group has come to America with their culture intact, and that has been the basis for their moving forward and prospering in this country as a land of opportunity. And so I think it's not either or. It's not a one approach, but a combination of approaches. And you got to go back to education. The whole idea of integration was wonderful, is wonderful. And I remember at Grant School when Bob Morris told us, Professor Morris told us that one day, boys and girls, you'll go to school with little white boys and girls. There was a spontaneous burst of laughter. Laughter in disbelief. Yeah, that's what he said. We will one day go to school. So education, how the world is changing, how we are now in a global economy, how we are impacted globally in everything that we do. So you got to train people and teach and educate people that you can no longer live on an island by yourself. In fact, the late Benjamin Mays would tell young boys, what do you want to be in life, son? Well, I'm going to be a lawyer. And what are you going to be after that? I'm going to be a successful lawyer. I'm going to have a big practice. He said, and, oh, no, I'm going to buy me a vacation home in Florida. And he said, I'm going to buy. Dr. Mays, why you keep asking me and? Dr. Mays said, all of your dreams and aspirations are about you. When will your dreams and aspirations expand to include others? Mm-hmm. I think that's where we are.
Mm-hmm. Right. Question from Sarah Lynn Archibald. How can we have changed legislation to give people the opportunity to vote once they have served their time? Do you know if anyone is working on that legislation?
Yes, State Representative G.A. Hardaway is go-to person on that. And his number, he may on me for doing this, but his number is 901-949-1000. Representative G.A. Hardaway, who is our spokesperson in the state legislature. And ideas, and although they are in a minority, the state legislature is overwhelmingly run by Republicans. They are still able to work across the aisle and get things done. And the time may be right to get such legislation passed now, but that needs to be worked on from that level.
Just for you, Dr. Gray, I'll take care of it. Gil Scott is on, and she says, I'd love to read the book, but I guess that's probably going to be difficult as I am in England. And I just told her to email me, and we'll get in touch and see can we arrange to get a copy of your book to her.
We'll send her a copy.
Okay.
We'll make a copy.
Gil, you got that? Okay. This has been just absolutely fantastic. This ties in so well with the thing that we talk about in LSP, why we do the work that we do, because the legacy of the difficulties that Dr. Gray has described that people have overcome, that difficulty sits on top of this legacy of racial terrorism. And I think this presentation just simply highlights the potential that is just buried, waiting to just explode. And we will do that. Okay, any other, we've got about 18 minutes left. Any other questions or comments? Habiba, you're on the board. Almela, you're on the board. Tom, you're on the board. If I'm missing any other board members, do any of you have any thoughts or comments? I see Dr. Brooks is hiding over there. Hello, Dr. Brooks. Any thoughts or comments? Unmute yourself. Yeah, there you go.
First, I'd like to thank Reverend Dr. LaSimba Gray. He's been such a griot and an impactful builder of the culture here in Memphis. He was such an influence on me at Lemoyne on college when I left, and so I'm glad to be back to continue the advocacy and legacy of such great work. And as we in LSP work to establish living memorials to remind people of our legacy, that we also must focus on statutes that change the policy. And so I love how Dr. Gray integrated the history and the present so that we can be more relevant, authentic, and meaningful to shifting and transforming Memphis. And so thank you, Reverend Doctor,
Thank you, brother.
for your
Thank you.
effort, and look forward to really building the city with you under your leadership.
My joy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I've been trying to retire for 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
I have not found a successful turn to brother William Beale Atkins.
I don't know if you, Dr. Gray, I don't know if you knew my stepmother, but she had a saying that, and you being a minister will appreciate this, but she said, there is no word in the Bible for retirement.
Well, I need to say this in all due respect. There is a sensible time in one's life when one goes shift focus, maybe not retire, but shift in focus. And I enjoy meeting with the younger ministers now, counseling with them. And every time I get a chance to go to the seminary, I enjoy my senior state and to get a chance to pour back into the many of the things for me. And Dr. Henry Logan Starks was one of those men who took time to say to you, he'd look in the face, you know what, Brother Gray, you are something. I never left him not feeling that I could walk on water. And that was needed many. And so maybe my shift in focus, Brother John, will be some folk would call. normally what I get from them, preachers not supposed to retire. I said, yeah, but pastors can.
Okay. And I'm going to back over to Tom in just a second, but I see, and I got to take a moment of levity here, but I see Pug Fuller is on with us. And folks, there's a standing commentary here that I just found out today. But Pug says he had a great deal to do with Dr. Gray. Pug, I know this is your first time with us. Any comment? Unmute yourself if it is. Okay, Pug may not still be with us. Tom, hey, Pug, go ahead.
Just passed on to Dr. LaSimba Gray that I'm so glad that I had a chance to influence his life somewhat during the Tennessee Black Caucus of State Legislators, and I'm still admiring what he's doing.
Well, Pug, thank you, man. Now this guy, you have photographs from all of them sessions, all those sessions, right?
25 years.
You did video and still shots, did you not?
That's correct.
Now, John, you need to get with him and then catalog those photographs. 25 years of that went on when the legislative caucus would come together to set the agenda for the Black Caucus in the ensuing year. And you may want a lot of history there. Well, good to hear from you, man. And I hope to see you soon.
Thank you. Take care.
John?
Yes.
I need Dr. Gray to tell us again what the project is that he's doing with his daughter, and I also want to comment that Angelique and I have a relationship, and you probably will get a supportive group because Mary Church Carroll was also very actively involved in it. But what is the event that's going to happen next week?
No, it's going to happen Thursday night. We're having a conversation around the birth date, rather, of Ida B. Wells. Thursday, she would have been 158 years old if she had lived. And so on that day, we want to launch the campaign to erect a statue of her on Beale Street.
Do we have John? Do we have the information, or does Jessica have that information?
No, we don't. And as I'm sitting here listening and thinking about it, and I think Dr. Gray had mentioned that to me before, but as I'm sitting here listening, here's the thought that comes to my mind. LSP board members, listen to what I'm about to say. Obviously, this just came up for most of us tonight, but I would like to think, if it's okay with Dr. Gray, I would recommend that a member of LSP or a representative of LSP participate in that meeting, if that's acceptable to Dr. Gray and his group.
Absolutely.
And Tom, I'll leave that to you and the board to decide that. I'm in Memphis. I'm probably not going to come down for it. And I'll leave that to you guys, and I'm saying a board member. It doesn't have to be a board member because we have a lot of people that do a lot of work for LSP. That might be something that Dr. Brooks would be interested in, or someone else. But Tom, I'm going to turn this meeting back to you anyway. We're almost finished. So why don't you go ahead and take it on that note, comment on that, on how you want to go. And if we need to arrange a Zoom meeting very quickly, we can do that. But Tom, let me refer back to you, please.
Sure. Thanks, John. And Dr. Gray, Reverend Dr. Gray,
Yes.
Thank you so much for sharing so deeply and broadly about your own experience in Memphis, as well as the history that we're all still needing to learn more about. I will make a phone call to you tomorrow to get more information about this event on Thursday evening. So just know I put that in my calendar just a moment ago.
Hey, Tom?
Yes.
Yeah.
Can I just add one name, because that's one of the areas he's working on is Jasper St. Bernard, the University of Memphis. That's his focus is Ida B. Wells.
Yes, Jasper is a doctoral student at the University of Memphis, and his thesis and focus is Ida B. Wells. So thank you, Randy, for that important reminder. We'll be in touch with him soon, make sure he knows about it. The thing that I have been thinking about as a person of European descent in this country, a German American, if you will, Momberg is my last name. I'm wondering if you have anything you might want to say to those of us on this call and to the white community in particular here in Memphis about how we can be part of the work that needs to be done to address racial terrorism and violence. I mean, I think many of us white folk have some ideas and are even doing some of that work, but I'd like your wisdom before we go, Reverend Dr. Gray, about how we can be part of the solution.
I really appreciate that that question, because white folk, Caucasian people, as I like to call you, European Americans, have always been a part of the movement to redeem us from the clutches of slavery and segregation and misrepresentation. I had a young, well, he wasn't young then, but he was my supervisor at Black and White downtown Shaneburg store on Main and Gayoso. And every time I think about my going to college, I think about Mr. Rush. He was my supervisor. He's about 5'6". And so he got word that I could go to school, but I wasn't sure that I was going. I was undecided about going to school. And Mr. Rush, Leo, come to my office. I said, what did I do? I'm afraid I've done something wrong. I said, what is it, sir? He said, I just heard you can go to Lane College. I said, yes, sir, I can go, but I'm not. He said, if you don't go, I'm going to fire you.
Ooh.
And I said, wow. He said, if you got a chance to go to school, and he turned red in the face, which said to me, he was serious about this thing. He said, you better go to school. If you got a chance, better go. So we've always had advocates and comrades across the aisle and ethnic groups to make our journey what it is today. I worked for an Italian family as a 11, 12-year-old boy. As a 16, 17-year-old boy, I worked for 2 Italian families. They gave me a job. I was able to get all of my books and fees by working at the Venucci restaurant and the Venucci grocery store on Elvis Presley, then Beretta's on Airways. I was able to make it because they gave me a job. They made accommodations for me because I was a senior at Mrs. Beretta's. She said, well, Leo, you come over Saturday morning and let's get it cleaned up before 12 o'clock and then you can be free. I said, yes, ma'am. I'd go over there. But they gave me a job from age 10. Now, some of you may think this is crazy, but from age 10, my dad had never had to pay for anything for me in school in terms of fees, books, and clothing. I had Caucasian friends who helped to make that happen, who gave me a sense of dignity in jobs, being able to make, and you can do that too. The thing that I would say to our brothers of means, there are a lot of redeeming projects that you can be a part of. You are a part of. This is one. LSP is one of those projects. But you'll see throughout the community projects that our people need help in, and you can do it. And I promise you, you'll never miss it.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Gray.
Thank you.
John, any final thoughts from you?
No, I'm good. Why don't you go ahead and close us out, and everybody stay safe, stay hydrated.
Yeah.
And on November 3rd, go to the polls and take 10 people with you.
I know there are several people within the LSP community who are working on that very kind of thing, getting people out for voting. And also we need to remember that those of us of a certain age can apply for absentee ballots. So let's not forget that as well. I want to express my personal gratitude to John Ashworth, who has been working so faithfully for us lo these many months and years as the executive director, and also finding these wonderful speakers each time we come together to help us learn more about what it means to be a human race together. So John has been, shall we say, elevated, John. The Tennesseans for Historical Justice have elected John as the president of their board, this new organization that's working at the state level to do the kind of thing that we're trying to do here in Shelby County. And so John will be stepping away from the executive director position officially October 1st. No one can replace John, but we will be looking for someone to serve in that role. And I think it's important for all of you to know that and to be thinking about who candidates might be for that kind of role. But John has made it clear that he will continue to be part of the LSP community in whatever way he can going forward. And that makes my heart glad to hear that from him. So John, we're not going to let you go quite yet. Just a reminder that in the months of July and August, at least we're going to have just one of these kinds of community meetings with a speaker. So this is the one for July. We will not be coming back together in 2 weeks, but we will be coming back together on that second Monday of August. And you'll be seeing, if you're on our email list, our newsletter list, you'll be seeing more about what that will entail in August. So anything else, John, that I've forgotten?
Tom, since you said that about me, let me just chime in and share some of my thinking. I think it's incumbent upon everybody in my age group, you know, I'll be 77 this year. But I think one of the things that's very important, we have to always keep an eye on tomorrow, and we have to always be constantly looking for people to replace us.
Yes.
And I'd encourage all you, regardless of what position you hold, you've got to always be looking around. We got to continuously develop the talent within our community and within our young people. And that's part of the reason why I think I need to step away. I enjoy doing what I'm doing. If I lived in Memphis, I'd probably try and hang on long, but I still think it's time to get younger people in play, and we old folks have to share that wisdom. So that's part of my thinking and stepping away, in addition to the THJ thing. I just wanted to add that in.
Thank you, John. Well, I see it's 1 minute until 7, and it feels like the right moment to say, once again, thank you for joining us this evening. Thanks again thanks and gratitude to Reverend Dr. LaSimba Gray for his deep and broad sharing with us this evening. And we look forward to seeing you virtually whenever we can. And please do check your email for our newsletters that come out, thanks to our good folks who keep all the news flowing, but especially thanks to Jessica Orions for her work as our chief technological guru. Once again, thanks, and be safe and be well, and we'll see you soon.